Hi, it's Lana from Sage and Sound, and this is a video about catastrophizing. So in this video, I want to talk to you about what catastrophizing is, why we do it, and then the most important part, the things that you can do to help yourself stop catastrophizing. So what is catastrophizing? Well, catastrophizing is when we're thinking about the future and we are imagining the worst possible outcome for something that is coming up. So, if you imagine that you've got to do a presentation, you are thinking that the audience will literally laugh in your face. If you're going to ask someone out for a date, they're going to say no, and then tell all their friends, and then trash you and talk about how silly you looked when you were asking them out for a date. Like the worst possible thing. It's often prefaced by words like, what if this thing happened? And the what if is a bit tricky because it's like, oh, we're just asking a question, what if this could happen? But in reality, the way that we're hearing it is this thing will happen. So why would you do that? Why would you imagine the worst possible outcome? It's not really very good for taking action and getting stuff done. The reason our brain does it is to protect us, which is the reason our brain does most things. It really, really, really wants to take care of us and keep us alive. So if you imagine the worst thing that could happen, that might help you make a decision about whether to do the thing or not. If we're thinking life or death situations, really, really important to include the possibility that you might die to see if you want to do something. But this is all a bit primitive in our modern world. Our physical safety is pretty much never in danger, and what we're looking at is just the emotional consequences of going through something. The other thing that tends to happen, so it is a protective thing. If you think about the worst that's going to happen, it might rain, I'll take an umbrella, that's not a problem. The problem with catastrophizing is that we rarely do it once, and there's not always something we can change. So if you can change something to avoid something bad happening, do it, easy. But it doesn't often work like that. Often we can't change what's going to happen. We don't know how other people are going to react to us, and thinking about it doesn't help. It only makes us more stressed, which actually makes us more likely to make a silly mistake. The other thing that we tend to do is go over and over the possibilities in our head. And every time we do that, there's a part of our brain that thinks that this is happening for real. It's not quite as strong as actually living through an experience, but what we see in our head, the images we generate, is somewhat believable to us, and so we can really elevate our stress levels by imagining this worst possible thing that's going to happen, not just once but over and over again in all these little different iterations. So we rapidly become so much more stressed than we would be if we just lived through the event, particularly when we're talking about these emotional consequences. So it comes from a good place, but it's really easy for it to get out of balance and do us a lot more harm than good. So if you're a catastrophizer, you're probably wondering, like, how do I stop this? It's the most important part. And there's a number of different psychological strategies that might help. So it's about just trying out the different ones and seeing what's going to work for you. The absolute simplest one to do is when you notice yourself catastrophizing, you say to yourself, I'm catastrophizing right now. Just labeling it in this way will help you to see that it's not particularly believable and that it's not going to help you. So now you've watched this video, you have that information. When you say to yourself, I'm catastrophizing, you'll immediately believe that that thing's going to happen a little bit less. And then you can follow that up by imagining the best. So we've been focused on the worst possible outcome. What's the absolute best thing that could happen? So if we think about you giving that presentation, the best thing that can happen is everyone's gonna love it. They're gonna give you amazing feedback and tell everyone they know that you should be hired as a speaker for their next event because you did such a great job. The person you're thinking about asking out on a date is going to say yes. You're going to go on the date. It's going to be amazing, and you're going to be partners for the rest of your lives. And when we talk like this, the idea is to be a bit light with it. If it makes you smile, that's a good thing. We're not aiming to believe that the best thing is going to happen. It just helps you to see that the absolute worst and the absolute best are equally unlikely to happen. And we know this. Statistically, there's something called the normal curve, and it means that most events tend to happen in this mid-range, and it's very unlikely that we get the worst or the best in any particular situation. So that's quite a simple technique to use. If that isn't effective for you, if realizing that it's an unlikely event doesn't sort of really stop you from thinking about it, the next thing you can do is express that fear. You can talk to somebody else about it if you have people around you that you trust. If you don't want to do that, you write it on a piece of paper. Having things in black and white or having it spoken changes the nature of it. It really brings in more of our critical brain and less of our emotional brain, and that's going to allow you to see that maybe that isn't so likely. So as soon as it's out of your mouth or as soon as the words are on the paper, that is something that can happen. If it doesn't happen, it's still feeling believable, then definitely grab a piece of paper. Write that fear at the top and then write down how you would cope with that thing happening. So if you're convinced the worst thing's going to happen, well, we want to have a plan for that. As I mentioned before, most of the things we're scared of having happen aren't things that are actually going to kill us. They'll just be uncomfortable from an emotional perspective. So how would you deal with that discomfort? Normally when we're catastrophizing, we do not take that next step of looking at what would happen. You know, we imagine the audience laughing at us and we just think, oh, I wouldn't cope with that. And then we go back to the beginning of the memory. With the date, you see that person laughing at you or talking to other people, and then you just pause. So what we want you to do is keep going. You wouldn't literally die, you would cope. So what would that look like, you know? You'd probably get super embarrassed. You may or may not leave the room. You may or may not walk away from that person. But then your life would go on, you know? If you literally got laughed out of the room and you could never speak again, you would move into a job that didn't require that of you. Eventually, you're going to move past the hurt of that person rejecting you, and you know, even if other people were to talk about you, you'd think to yourself, well, you know, maybe these people are not my friends in the way I thought they were, and you would meet new people over time. Your life would go on. So doing the planning, while it is a fair bit more effort, if you cannot get rid of those catastrophizing thoughts, it's worth going to the effort of seeing that you would survive it. Because remember I said before, our brain's really interested in wanting to keep us protected, in ensuring that we survive. So when you go through that process and show it, I would survive that, it doesn't need to keep thinking about it anymore. And now the last thing that you can do is, if you've gone to the effort of writing the worries down and how you would cope with that situation happening, don't waste that information. When you actually go to give that speech or go to ask that person out on a date, which is going to be so much easier now that you've written down your plan for what you'll do if it all goes wrong, go through the event and then take your essentially their predictions about what was going to happen and review them. Try to be a bit scientific about it. Okay, I predicted that X, Y, and Z would happen, but what actually happened? Doing this is going to show you one of two things, and you'll win either way, which is why I absolutely love this technique. So it's either going to show you that you were wrong, and this is what happens most of the time. As I said, the absolute worst case scenario doesn't happen very often. So usually we discover that we're terrible predictors, that there's a reason we haven't chosen psychic as our profession. We're wrong. And when you review the evidence like this, when you look back at the event and what you thought was going to happen and then how it actually played out, you show yourself that those predictions aren't accurate. You really do need to go in and do the work of looking at what you thought and what actually happened, it's like a reflection, in order to change your brain for the next time that it's likely to catastrophize. What tends to happen in these situations is we're just so relieved that we got through the situation that we never want to think about it ever again. It's like, oh, thank gosh, that is over, and we just roll on. But what that means is that our brain can't learn from the situation. You haven't shown it, hey, you don't need to catastrophize. It doesn't actually work out that badly. So this process allows you to teach your brain that, which means next time something's coming up that you're a bit worried about, it's going to be easier to understand the worst isn't likely to happen. So it's super effective in that sense. However, every so often, you know what's going to happen? The bad thing. It may actually be as you've predicted. If this is going to happen, what you can do is, well, one, you've already got a plan written down. We already got you to plan it out. So stick to your plan. Notice how you cope with the thing happening. So even if it's as bad as you've predicted, you aren't going to die, you are going to survive it. And again, even though completely different situation, your brain is learning the same thing. It doesn't need to catastrophize because you know how to cope in those situations. So part of catastrophizing is that figuring out the plan for how you would cope. That's the part of the functionality of it. So if you can show yourself, your brain, hey, I can cope with that. I can cope with people laughing at me, people rejecting me. Look, I'm still here. I do these things and be kinder to myself for a little bit. My life goes on. And that will still send the message to your brain, you know what? We do not need to catastrophize. We don't need to plan so much for the future. So, I hope you've been able to learn something from this video and that you've got some ideas to try out next time you find yourself catastrophizing. Keep in mind, it is totally normal. It's part of a pattern in our brain that we all have because it protects us. We just don't want it to be stopping us from living our lives or being our dominant thinking pattern. That's when it causes problems. So good luck with the exercises. And if you would like some more help, some more information about this kind of stuff, these are the kind of videos and information we send out in our newsletter list. So I'll pop a link in the comments, and if you subscribe to that, then you'll be able to get more information on your mind and how to work with it rather than have it work against you. Take care, have a great day.